Of all the gems and jewels in the world, there's only one that's perfect at the moment it's found. No cutting or polishing needed.
Rather large one. A jewelry designer will have a great time with that one.
A round, lustrous pearl. This top-quality specimen should sell for about $5,000. A choker of pearls like this costs as much as a house. For centuries, these shimmering beauties were the rarest, most precious of all jewels. Prized more than sapphires, rubies, emeralds, even diamonds. Join us as we explore the mystery of pearls, where they come from, how they grow, and the people who have given their money, even their lives, for the perfect pearl. About 40 miles off the southwest coast of Australia lie the Abrolhos Islands. Here in these remarkably unpolluted waters, the rare black-lipped Pincata maxima thrives, source of the much-coveted black pearl. On this remote island, husband and wife team Murray Davidson and Pia Bichetti are selectively breeding these oysters to produce perfect black pearls.
Do you want me to grab your knife, Wayne?
No, I'm actually going to cook the feed.
Oh, take.
Twice a year, they harvest part of their crop, pearls that have been growing for 2 years. Some of the industry's best technicians, Kazui Chidi Tucker and Masao Seki, fly into work for 4 weeks. It's exacting, meticulous work, but each manages to harvest as many as 1,000 pearls a day. About half the pearls are so good that the oyster is reseeded.
I'm going to put another nucleus inside.
Despite the long hours and spending weeks away from home, Kazui likes the work.
It's always challenging. Yep. And then I like pearls.
Like coral and amber, pearls are organic gems. Gems created by living things rather than geological processes. These soft, shimmering jewels are produced by a marine mollusk, usually an oyster or a mussel, reacting to an irritant. Shona Bentley explains the process to tourists at Willie Creek Pearl Farm in Broome, Australia.
This is what the inside of the oyster looks like. You can only see half of it. I have actually cut this half off. We're going to put something a little bit bigger than a grain of sand in the oyster's gonad, and that's how we're going to make a pearl.
Actually, the nucleus is much larger than a grain of sand. It's 8 to 12 millimeters, more the size of a pebble. Consider a pebble in your shoe. It's painful, so you shake it out. An oyster, on the other hand, cannot as easily get rid of something that enters its shell. But what the oyster can do is neutralize the irritation by creating a protective coating around it called nacre.
Underneath the sensory tissue, this here is called the mantle tissue. Now the mantle tissue is what secretes nacre, which is this gooey substance, so it looks like egg whites. Now that is nacre, N-A-C-R-E. And if this was to crystallize on my hand, my fingers would be a pearl. And that is what makes pearl, the nacre.
Nacre is made up of calcium carbonate and conchiolin, which is a fibrous protein.
All these miniature little crystals are laid out layer by layer with that glue, natural glue, and it just keeps coating and coating and coating, and eventually, given enough time, that pearl starts growing and get to a pretty sizable shape and form.
And despite what most people think, a pearl does not grow around a grain of sand.
The grain of sand myth is very romantic, but unfortunately, the nacre does not adhere to an inorganic substance. So therefore, basically, sand, small pebbles, rocks cannot make pearls.
Instead, most pearls form around living tissue such as a snail or a worm. In just a few months, the hardened layers of nacre create a small pearl, which can continue growing for as many as 15 to 20 years. Only a few mollusks produce beautiful pearls. Most mollusks, such as the oysters and mussels we eat, do not produce nacre, so they cannot create true, lasting pearls. Like fingerprints, no two pearls are exactly alike. But as with all gems, certain qualities are prized more than others. A pearl's value depends on its size, shape, color, complexion, and luster.
When you do pick up a pearl, if it has many scratches, marks, dimples, dents, it's got a bad complexion. You want one nice and smooth and round like this one here, okay, or the strand that I'm wearing, it's got a great complexion.
It's extremely rare for a pearl to have a perfect complexion.
The luster is probably the most important thing into a pearl because a pearl needs to shine, needs to reflect the light. And that's obviously done if the build of the nacre is even across the pearl.
The more clear and defined that you can see all your features inside that pearl, the higher the luster. It's the many layers and layers of nacre that have evenly been put around it, so they reflect all the way, go all the way in, bounce all the way back out, and the sharper the picture you get.
These qualities are also a matter of personal taste, of course. Depending on the kind of oyster, the color can range from pastel to black. And pearls come in many unusual shapes, known as baroque. Any shape can make a beautiful piece of jewelry, which is a good thing, because over the centuries, natural round pearls have been hard to come by.
Pearls in nature, typically only about 1% of them are actually perfectly round.
In fact, natural pearls of any shape are hard to find because most oysters don't contain pearls.
We would have to kill at least 15,000 oysters to get one natural saleable pearl.
And it's that rarity which throughout history has made pearls so coveted and so valuable. For millions of years, millions of oysters and mussels crowded the waters of the world. We don't know who first discovered pearls, but it probably occurred around the same time man discovered oysters as food. Since then, pearls have been the stuff of legend.
When you really trace the lore of a lot of gemstones, it actually translates back to a lot of ancient cultures.
In Greek mythology, pearls were tears of joy shed by Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. The pearl goddess of ancient Egypt was Isis, healer and giver of life. The earliest evidence of pearl jewelry was found in the sarcophagus of a Persian princess who died in 520 BC. A few centuries later, rich Roman women used pearls much more lavishly. They upholstered couches with them and sewed so many of them into their hems that they literally walked on pearls. Laws were eventually passed against such vulgar displays, but the Roman lust for pearls continued. In fact, Julius Caesar invaded England partly for the pearl supplies. According to Pliny, the Roman historian, Cleopatra used 2 pearls to prove her wealth and power to the Roman general Mark Antony. The 2 pearls were worth 117,000 pounds of silver. At today's prices, that would be $20 million.
She took one of her pearl earrings off and she dissolved it into a cup of vinegar and she drank it down.
When she reached for the second pearl, Mark Antony stopped her. She had proven her point. Her riches demanded Roman respect. But would a pearl really dissolve in vinegar? In fact, it would if it were crushed. The vinegar's 5 to 6% acidity would dissolve the pearl's calcium carbonate. And could you drink the vinegar mixed with pearl? Again, yes. The calcium carbonate would act as an antacid to balance the vinegar. For the next 1,500 years, pearls remained a high-priced luxury that only the rich, which usually meant the royal, could afford. When Spanish conquerors made their way to the New World in the early 1500s, they found that the Incas and Aztecs had vast supplies of pearls, which they prized for both their beauty and their alleged magical powers.
They assigned gemstones according to the celestial heavens. And pearl, for example, was very symbolic to the moon. It was lustrous, it was full, it was bright.
To the Spanish conquerors, though, pearls represented something else: cash. The value of the pearls exported to Spain exceeded that of all other exports combined, including emeralds, gold, and silver. The huge supply was sold to royals all over Europe, including England's Queen Elizabeth, who loved pearls more than any other gem.
Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Henrietta Maria, they adorned themselves with loads of pearls.
One of the most famous pearls found in the Americas is La Peregrina, or the Wanderer. The 50-carat pear-shaped white pearl, the size of a pigeon's egg, was found off the coast of Panama in the mid-1500s.
One of the largest pearls I've ever seen was La Peregrina, and it came from the Americas and was eventually shipped over to Europe. But it was owned by people like Philip II, Mary Tudor of England, and also by somebody very famous here in the States, Elizabeth Taylor.
Taylor's husband, Richard Burton, had Cartier jewelers fashion the pearl into an exquisite necklace, adorned with diamonds and rubies. But even with the vast number of pearls in the Americas, the supply couldn't last forever. By the end of the 19th century, pearls were getting scarce. Oysters had been over-harvested, both for pearls and for food, and pollution had wiped out even more. Even for the very rich, about the only hope of acquiring pearl jewelry was to inherit it. Meanwhile, in Australia and Japan, 4 men, all working independently, began trying to control the way oysters and mussels create pearls. Their work would lead to a startling change in the pearl industry. Today's pearl market is almost entirely made up of cultured pearls, that is, pearls grown under controlled conditions. Only 1% of the market is natural pearls, pearls that occur strictly by chance. How could a gem supply change so completely in less than a century? It was the combination of scarcity and the work of a tireless entrepreneur by the name of Kokichi Mikimoto. Stimulating oysters to grow pearls wasn't a new idea. The Chinese had been trying to culture pearls since the 1300s.
They didn't produce round pearls in any way, form, or shape. They were kind of semi-spherical and not very uniform in shape. By about 2 centuries later, they were actually using little Buddhas and different images that they carved and they put them inside there, and then those would get coated with some type of nacre, and they sell them as Lucky Charms and things.
But in the late 1800s, several inventors were independently motivated by the dwindling natural pearl supply. Australian William Saville Kent discovered that if he took a piece of mantle, which is an outgrowth from the inner oyster shell, from one oyster and then implanted it in another, a pearl would form. In Japan, government biologist Tokichi Nishikawa and carpenter Tatsui Misei learned of Saville Kent's technique. In 1907, Nishikawa patented the grafting needle, which is still used in pearl culturing. Also in Japan, Kokichi Mikimoto, the son of a noodle maker, was buying patents for similar techniques. He already had an 1896 patent for producing hemispherical pearls called mabes, and a 1908 patent for culturing in mantle tissue. But his breakthrough came in 1916.
He invented the idea of using the shell bead nucleus as the culture pearl seed.
Shells were cut up and ground into spheres, and those spheres became the bead nucleus that was used in the cultivation process.
For the first time in history, Mikimoto was able to create genuine pearls that were perfectly round and white. But Mikimoto's real genius was for business. He bought the needle grafting patent from Nishikawa and Misei, launched large-scale pearl production, and began convincing the world that cultured pearls were real, gorgeous, and affordable.
Two pearls were available at that time, natural pearls and imitation pearls. Now, imitation pearls were considered fakes, or they called them not real, and the natural pearls were called real pearls. And he had worked tirelessly, globally, trying to get his cultured pearls to be considered under the name real rather than fake or imitation. And it worked.
When cultured pearls first hit the market, there was a wobble to see what they were going to do. And when they became pretty enough and larger and more available, that's when the natural pearl market plummeted.
World War II proved a turning point in the popularity of cultured pearls.
The GIs were in Japan at that time, right after World War II, and bringing back necklaces, strands, pendants, earrings for their wives, grandmothers, daughters, and it never stopped.
Now that cultured pearls were affordable for almost everyone, strands of pearls became a fashion staple. Pearls had been a traditional wedding gift for centuries, but now instead of just a single pearl or two, brides received a whole strand. Cultured pearls had truly cornered the market, a position that they hold to this day. In fact, the most widely known cultured pearls are the Akoya pearls, a saltwater pearl with the average size of a pea, 6 to 8 millimeters.
That is the classic look. When you look at pictures and portraits of women through the last several decades, that's what they most likely are wearing, are these Akoya or Japanese cultured pearls.
These pearls come from the Akoya oyster, originally cultivated by Mikimoto. More than 2,000 independent growers cultivate these pearls in the waters around the southern half of Japan, which is the largest Akoya habitat in the world. Less than half of the oysters survive nucleation, and of the pearls produced, less than 5% are of a very high quality. Yet far more Akoyas are grown than any other saltwater pearl, so most saltwater pearl necklaces are Akoyas. Akoyas are exceptionally round, white, and lustrous. A choker of very fine 8mm pearls will run as much as $11,000. Although Japan controlled most of the Akoya market for decades, other countries now cultivate these saltwater oysters, most notably China. Today, some of the finest pearls in the world are cultured in the ocean off the west coast of Australia. The giant South Sea pearl, so big and lustrous that it's called the Queen of Pearls, grows in several countries. The finest silvery and creamy and white gold pearls are grown near Broome, Australia. Creamy and golden pearls are also grown in the Philippines, Indonesia, and China. Farther south, in the Abrolhos Islands, the large black-lipped oyster is cultured for black pearls, which range in color from gray to black and even to green. These are commonly called Tahitian pearls. French Polynesia, Tahiti, is best known for black pearls and is the #1 producer. But they are also produced in the Cook Islands, as well as the Abrolhos. The black pearl has only been farmed since the early 1960s, when Jean-Marie Domon began using Japanese culturing techniques on the black-lipped oyster. An extremely large, top-quality black pearl can fetch as much as $10,000. Pia Bichetti and Murray Davidson live here on an island 6 months a year, enduring isolation and the overwhelming smell of dead oysters in the pursuit of great Tahitian pearls. It's late September, time to seed the oysters.
What we're doing is just getting them ready for seeding, and just to give the fresh start for the next 2 years. These are 5 years old. They get seeded around the 3rd year, and if it's a good pearl again, they'll reseed it again. And we've actually got up to 5th seeds in it, so we've tried for a 5th time. We've got 2,200 to get through today for the technicians for tomorrow. So it's about 170 panels. So yeah, it's quite a bit.
Cultivating these oysters is not an easy job. This far south, the cool water temperatures make the oysters grow slowly. But the slow growth also allows the pearls to develop an exceptionally deep luster. The cultivating process begins with breeding large, healthy oysters that grow quickly and produce good pearls.
But you've got to be really careful about what you're doing when you are selectively breeding, because you don't want to breed brothers and sisters with each other. I mean, if you do breed that, you know, you're going to get a lot of weak oysters. It's all the things that farmers have been doing on the land for about the last 50 years, and we're just transferring that knowledge straight over into pearl oyster farming.
Oysters are hermaphrodites, both male and female, and during the warm summer months, they spit out sperm and eggs, which join with that of other oysters and fertilize in the open water. The resulting little oysters are known as spats.
When we pick them up from a hatchery when they're 2 months old, sometimes they're not visible to the eye, and sometimes you can see them maybe the size of a pinhead. Yeah, they're very tiny.
A year later, the tiny spats have grown to about 2 inches in diameter.
Once we get them from the hatchery, they come on like a Christmas tree rope. It looks like a Christmas tree decoration, this rope. It's black, and we chop it up into about a metre length, and on that metre length we'll have about 1,000 shell, and we put that inside a cage, and we leave it there it stays in there for about 3 months, and then we start picking them off once they're about 10 mil. We take them off there and we put them into 45 pocket panels for about 6 months, and then we take them out and they go into a 30 mil mesh, 15 pockets, and they stay there right up until they're ready to be seeded. And that'll be like another 1.5 years, maybe 2 years.
While they're growing, the crew pulls them up out of the water for cleaning about once a month. The workers scrub off barnacles and parasites so the oysters can feed easily. And so an invasive parasite won't burrow in and distract the oyster from its pearl-making mission. They also clean out any predators.
This one here, it's a fox shell. It'll get in and it can kill like 50 oysters, whatever's in a cage.
When the oysters are about 1.5 years old, it's time to seed them. Regardless of the type of saltwater pearl, whether Akoya, South Sea, or Tahitian, the basic seeding process is the same.
When you seed an oyster, the actual nuclei goes into the gonad. Let's say that the gonad has egg in it. When the technician tries to operate in these circumstances, the egg will spill everywhere, and you will end up with an irregular shaped pearl. They call it baroque, or you'll get a pearl that doesn't have much colour. The colour's very, not dull, but silver, the more silvery colours. They're still very nice, but we aim to get the more darker colours. So if you can find the right time of year where the egg's not in huge amounts, that's a good time for seeding. It's normally in the cooler months.
The process of seeding is a delicate one that requires both a shell bead nucleus and a bit of mantle tissue called cybo. Acquiring the cybo means the death of the donor oyster. But the cybo can culture dozens of oysters.
We have to cut the cybo first. Cybo is a mantle tissue. We cut off the one shell, then we cut off the piece of the mantle on small sponges. Then cut off maybe 3 mil square piece of meat. Then open up another shell. Then we cut some spot. Then we put in cybo first. Doesn't matter. Some technician cybo first, then nucleus. Some technician does a nucleus first, and then cybo, put on a cybo, but put them together. Then about 2 weeks later, cybo just melt down and covered up all nucleus. Then start from there. If shell spit out the nucleus, then we got nothing. So normally we can get 80 to 90% retentions, which is good.
The oysters are returned to the water, where they, and hopefully the pearl, will grow for 2 years. Then they're pulled back up for harvesting. This modern harvesting technique is a big improvement over the early days of natural pearl fishing. Those pearl divers attached a rope to one leg and dove down 30 to 40 feet in the Arabian Gulf, the world's best pearl source for thousands of years. In Australia, in the early 1900s, divers in cumbersome diving suits collected oysters both for their inner shell, the mother of pearl lining used to make buttons, and the occasional pearl. It meant risking their lives day in and day out.
They obviously had sharks, you had currents. One of the biggest hazards was if they fell over in this equipment, if they fell onto their head, they'd be dragged along the bottom of the ocean on their head, which would force all sorts of things to happen. Obviously death by drowning, or the air hose would be severed. When they changed over to kerosene-driven pump in the 1914s, a lot of divers were getting poisoned by the fumes, and they used to signal to the surface to come up, and they would close the valve, which is like a buoyancy valve on the helmet, and then the tender would assist by pulling to the surface. They'd pass out, which meant the valve was shut, the suit would be filling full of air, and they'd be getting larger and larger and start to ascend to the top at a great rate of knots, which would obviously cause embolisms, an onset of the bends, possibly their eyes popping out of their head, if you like. All sorts of horrible things would happen to. So they were faced with many, many hazards.
Nowadays, the oysters are simply pulled to the surface, where they're cleaned and then pegged open.
We normally peg about an hour before the shell get to the technician, and because they go through these quite quickly, we'll be really busy, just because we have only 2 peggers. This pegging's one of the important parts as well, because you can damage the muscle, and then you won't know the oyster's been affected by it for about maybe 4 weeks, because the oyster will just get weaker and weaker when you do muscle damage.
Once the oysters are pegged, the technicians have to work quickly.
These shells can stay out of the water for about, if they're out of the wind, they can stay out for about 2 hours without any problem. But if you leave them out in the wind and they dry out while they're sitting pegged like this, it'll make the oyster dry out and probably die. That's why we're inside when we're pegging, and we make it a nice sort of warm environment.
Harvesting takes only a few seconds.
Open them up and then make the incision near the pearl, and then just take it out.
Kazui checks each pearl for quality.
It's got a few marks.
Because of those marks, this oyster will not be reseeded. Kazui will work with about 800 oysters a day, and about 400 of them will be good enough to reseed.
This one's, I think we've already tried once or twice before, so it's less chance to reseed again. The shell's getting older, losing the colors.
As is true for all farming, the crop varies from year to year. Sudden changes in water temperature, a lack of food, storms, or disease can kill the oysters.
One year we had a tsunami around here. That affected our pearls because the water temperature went up and there was just a different flow of water coming through. So temperature spikes and different water conditions like that can make the gonad really shrink, and then it will affect the pearl for, it might not even recover.
Always up and down, all depends on the conditions of shells and farm conditions and our conditions too. So always up and down, so very hard to keep one level. Sometimes good harvest, sometimes, not very good.
About 50% of the pearl's Masao seeds become round pearls of 10 to 12 millimeters. A few grow as large as 14 to 17 millimeters.
We can see the all result, 2 years later, some nice pearl coming out. That's very nice to see and, make us happy. "1,200 miles north, near Broome, Australia, thrives the silver-lipped Pincata maxima. This huge mollusk produces exceptionally large white South Sea pearls, the so-called queen of pearls.
These ones are extremely rare. Out of the whole production, for example, of last year's harvest, we only had 500 pearls approximately that were over 19 millimeters.
Lance O'Sullivan has been working for Kalis Pearls for 20 years, managing a 200,000 shell farm.
The farm covers just over 8 square miles in area. It's virtually in the middle of the bay.
Here, where the water is warmer, the rate of nacre production is faster, creating an exceptionally thick pearl coating over the nucleus. Because of the warmer temperatures, the luster is also softer, giving these pearls a satiny glow. In Broome, they employ 2 different farming techniques.
We've got a bottom farming technique where the shell is strung in panels on the bottom on fence lines.
This technique more closely replicates how oysters grow in the wild, on the ocean floor, but reaching them requires scuba gear. The second method places oysters near the surface, with 100 panels to a line.
Just through results and tests we've done, we're getting better results from the shell on the surface. The shells seem to grow quicker, they're bigger, and the pearls come out a much bigger pearl and heavier pearl.
One boat will do about 5 long lines a day, which is 5,000 shell. There's about probably 3 or 4 boats working out there. So they probably get about 15 long lines done a day.
Cleaning these Maxima shells is more difficult and more critical than cleaning the black-lipped oyster because the shells are bigger and because the warm waters encourage disease.
Now there's a few things that we do look for on the oysters. One is called red ass disease. Okay, now what happens with the red ass is a red tinge actually starts at the base of the oyster, okay, and it eventually eats away at it. It's a little bit like osteoporosis.
It's encountered on the farm shell when we're doing harvesting or x-rays. We'll remove it from the farming quota and kill it, and hopefully we'll remove it from all of our stock from that in that way.
Here, as with the black-lipped oyster, if an oyster produces a smooth, round, lustrous pearl, it will be reseeded.
As we harvest our shell, the technicians make a decision whether to reoperate the shell and place another nuclei in it, or they'll kill the shell because it hasn't produced a good pearl or its health isn't up to scratch. And so, you know, usually out of a harvest we might reoperate around 50% of our shell. We take pearls out, they'll reoperate 50% of it, and the other 50%, 40% will be killed.
So after we pull out that 8.2 mil pearl, okay, what we'll do is grab an 8.2 mil nucleus, do the same thing, put it on the cuppa, put it back inside the gonad. It can go straight onto the long line where it will spend for the next 2 years, out in the ocean getting force-fed by the tides.
After 2 years inside the oyster, the farmer hopes to harvest a pearl that will be about 10.5 millimeters in size. With luck, it will also be round and lustrous.
We usually only get one reoperation, and sometimes we go up to 2 second reoperation, but we found out through experience that basically the animal's a bit tired by then and he won't produce a good pearl. You know, and they've had their life in their farming, so pretty well, a very small amount of second reoperations.
The larger the nucleus, however, the greater the chance that the oyster will die during the implantation process or reject the nucleus altogether and not produce a pearl. For this reason, large pearls are much rarer than small ones. And the larger the pearl, the more expensive. An oyster may be reseeded 2 to 5 times, depending on the quality of the pearl it produces. Culturing also produces some beautiful pearls called keshi. These pearls form as a byproduct of the culturing process, usually when the oyster expels the nucleus. With the mantle tissue still in place, nacre is secreted, but without a round nucleus, the nacre forms in virtually any shape, just as it would for natural pearls.
They're very irregular, they've got so much character, they're fantastic.
And it's just fascinating to see what different one you're going to get out of it each time, rather than the round cultured ones.
Because keshis are all nacre, with no bead nucleus, they have a high luster. Another unusual shape is the mabe, sometimes called a blister pearl. It's produced by setting a hollow, half-round form on the inside of the shell and allowing the mollusk to cover it with nacre.
Eventually, they'll cut the little dome off and they'll fill that with something and then put a mother pearl backing on it, and those are used quite often in earrings. So you see quite a lot of designs with mabe pearl earrings, sometimes used in rings and pendants, but a lot of them are in earrings.
When the oyster stops producing good pearls, it's sold off for parts.
Once the shell are killed, we remove the guts and the meat, and that's processed. The meat is sold for a good price. The guts is put through a machine to make sure we get any product that's left in there, keshis and small pieces, and then that can be either used as a byproduct for fish food, or even some of our hatcheries. We're in the hatchery business, we use some of that for food in our hatcheries.
A top-quality 17mm South Sea pearl can cost around $13,000. Making them not only the largest, but the most expensive cultured pearls in the world. But smaller, more affordable akoyas are far more common. And in fact, once you leave salt water, you find even less expensive pearls that are produced by the millions of tons each year. In eastern China, people have been farming freshwater pearls for decades.
They've gotten to the point now over years of developing techniques that got it down pat, and they see some very nice pieces out there.
Here, the pearls may grow for 2 to 5 years. And instead of one large pearl, these mussels can produce more than 30 smaller pearls. The difference is in the culturing technique. In this technique, rather than implanting one bead in a small bit of mantle tissue, as for the South Sea pearls, technicians take tiny pieces of mantle tissue only and implant them throughout the host mussel.
What they use is the mantle tissue, which is basically a little bit of the meat, a little bit of the fleshy part, that they actually cut a small section of that and introduce that into the mollusk, the freshwater mollusk, and it's found that that is enough to start the nucleating process. The growth of a pearl will actually occur and basically dissolve that little mantle tissue. So what you have is a pearl that is nacre through and through. It's not a thin coating of a nacre or pearl or surrounding a bead, but what you have is a full pearl that's all nacre. If you were to cut that in half, there's no bead nucleus, it's all pearl.
The result is round freshwater pearls in a rainbow of colors, in sizes of 11 millimeters and more. While strands of uniform white pearls are still largely unavailable, necklaces combining various shades are becoming very popular. Today, most of the freshwater pearl market belongs to China. In 2005, China produced 800 tons of pearls, which was 95% of all freshwater pearl production. In 2006, the harvest rose to 1,200 tons. And with 7,000 pearl farms employing 200,000 people, it looks as though the numbers will continue to rise. There's more to China's pearl industry than just farming the pearls. These pearls pass through many skilled hands and processes before they hit the market. First, workers sort the pearls according to size, shape, and color. Many grow naturally in pastel shades such as lavender, pink, peach, and silver. Next, they drill holes into the pearls. This process requires such precision that they practice on beans for a month before they tackle actual pearls. The pearls are then soaked in a solution to enhance their luster, and some are dyed to create bright, fashionable colors.
Many gemstones are treated, and pearls are no exception. What they try and do is enhance the beauty of the pearl. So they do dye them. They add any number of colors. You see it frequently on the freshwater pearls. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it's disclosed. And they can create some beautiful colors. I mean, you can get blues, greens. I've seen some incredible colors, but you look at it and you know it's not natural. But Mother Nature's not going to make a bright blue pearl. So if you want to color coordinate your whole closet, well, in some cases, the dyeing's not such a bad alternative.
Finally, the pearls are matched in size to create a necklace. It may take dozens of mollusks to produce similar sizes of pearls. Freshwater pearls grow all over the world, including here in the Kentucky Lake in West Tennessee.
Pearl, there it is, right there. Oh, that's a nice one. This one here is probably worth about $40, $50. We're just small, but we produce a good quality pearl. And this pearl right here is about as good, as perfect as a pearl as you'll ever find. Here we are at the pearl farm.
The freshwater pearls cultured in Tennessee start with a bead core, much as the saltwater pearls do. In fact, the artificial bead at their core is probably the very same kind of mussel shell.
When you buy a strand of pearls, rest assured that that implant, that seed, that nuclei has come right here from the waters of the Tennessee River.
Back in the early 1900s, when Mikimoto was developing his method of culturing pearls, he experimented with bead cores made of everything from wood to glass. He found that nacre adhered best to American mussel shell. For the past 90 years, these shells have been at the heart of almost all cultured pearls.
So this is a shell, a Tennessee River shell called the washboard shell because it looks like your grandmother's washboard from the early 1900s. That's where it gets its name. These shells are harvested yearly, and what they do after they are exported to Japan, they are cut into these slices like this. Now this one is a large slice. This one comes from a shell that is 3 times as large as this one. And the slices are then cut into dice, and these dice are then ground into round beads. And these are the round beads that create cultured pearls.
Unlike other shells, these mussel shells grind to a very smooth, dense surface, which encourages the nacre to form into a very smooth pearl. Whether from freshwater or saltwater, pearls come in an astonishing range of sizes, shapes, and colors. If the past century is any indication, the number of choices will only continue to grow. Whether round, oval, baroque, keshi, or mabe, the same principles are used to create a piece of pearl jewelry.
A pearl will always have what we call a clean face, so it will actually show on one side better than another side, and obviously that's what we use to set. If there is a specific spot where we want to hide, that's in general what the jewelers drill a hole.
The classic pearl necklace, a strand of round pearls, is traditionally strung on soft, fine griffin silk, with one knot between each pearl. The knots keep the pearls from rubbing together and damaging the nacre. And if the strand breaks, only one pearl is lost. It's a good idea to restring pearls when the thread is dark and dirty, or if the pearls move loosely between the knots. Because pearls are created by living tissue, they're easily damaged by chemicals. Even the lemon juice or vinegar in your salad dressing can eat through the nacre, just as Cleopatra's pearl dissolved in a glass of vinegar.
They are organic, and when they're exposed to hairspray, perfumes, cosmetics, that can actually break down their nacreous coatings because it is an organic substance and those are chemicals.
It's also a good idea to wash your pearls from time to time because a greasy coating will make them appear dull. Wash them in warm, sudsy water. Then dampen a tea towel and roll them up in the towel so there's a layer of cloth between each layer of pearls. This method keeps the string from stretching and can keep your pearls safe and lustrous so future generations can enjoy them as much as you do. When the cloth is dry, the pearls are ready to wear. And speaking of the future, what is the future for pearls? Can culturing go on forever, or will pearls someday be as rare as they once were? Although China is producing freshwater pearls at an astonishing rate, pollution threatens oysters and mussels all over the world. In Tennessee, for instance, a pearl company recently lost an entire crop.
There were mussels dying everywhere and we didn't know what was wrong. And then we realized that there was some sort of pesticide, new pesticide that had been used at the farming areas, and we had great amount of rain that same week. And so that runoff went straight into the little bay where our pearl farm was and destroyed over half a million shells. And we were never able to start that farm up again. It was a great loss.
Even Australia's pristine waters are threatened.
They're starting to do a bigger study on it now because it's starting to get lower and lower quality of water. You know, compared to 15 years ago, it was really good quality. Now there's more and more people around, so the pollution gets bigger and bigger.
For now, though, Australia is still a growth market. In fact, while Pia Buschetti was looking for wild black-lipped oysters to breed with her hatchery oysters, she found a surprising new oyster. It turned out to be the Akoya. Japan's prized oyster was growing thousands of miles south of Japan.
We're currently producing pearls from these. It's a totally new industry. I'm the only one in Western Australia doing it. And it looks very promising because the pearls we're getting are quite big. We get between 9 and 11 mil, which is quite large for Akoya pearls. So in about 3 years, we should be producing probably around 300,000 of these a year.
In centuries past, that would have been a king's ransom. With careful farming and inventive production methods, as well as increased efforts to mitigate the environmental threat, pearl farmers like Pia Boschetti hope to be able to make it possible and affordable for everyone to own one of man's first precious gems, pearls.